News Radio 1000, KTOK, 89 degrees in Oklahoma City, Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. We are so fortunate tonight to spend this hour with a famous author and professor and incredible human being named John J. Dwyer, who grew up in Duncan and has taught history and ethics at Southern Nazarene University since 2006. And is with me tonight because of his great love of Oklahoma history. The Oklahoman newspaper ranked his latest book, World War II Epic Mustang, sequel to Shortgrass, the best-selling fiction book in the state last summer. Mustang had just been nominated for the Will Rogers Medallion Award. The Oklahoma Hall of Fame journalist Patrick McGuigan and publisher of Oklahoma City's Sentinel newspaper called it perhaps the greatest American war novel since The Red Badge of Courage. He joins me this evening because of his great appreciation of history, but also the fact that he has been spending a great portion of his life over the past few years doing a book, a historical narrative called The Oklahomans, the story of Oklahoma and its people, Volume 1, which he and I have talked about, which has been cited as the best book on Oklahoma history ever. And Volume 2 will release next year. Both The Oklahomans and Shortgrass and John's Dust Bowl World War II novel won the National Will Rogers Medallion Award Literary Contest for Western Literature. He is here, and I'm going to steal his words. He has written these words. Has there ever been a more electrifying year of Oklahoma history than 2020? And he joins me this evening to talk about it and how he plans to approach these more recent years. So John J. Dwyer, author and guest, thank you for joining me on a Sunday night. Welcome to 1000.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the best show and the best audience that I know of in Oklahoma radio. I appreciate it very much.
Let's talk about Oklahoma history because I took these words, I think it was your Facebook post, about the electrifying year in Oklahoma history. Because you, with Oklahomans Volume 1, tell us what you covered and now what you are putting in Volume 2.
Well, Gwen, Volume 1, as probably a lot of your listeners know, it began with the ancient history of Oklahoma that goes back thousands of years and traveled all the way up to and just past statehood, 1907. So basically it went up to 1910, covered the oil booms, the Trails of Tears, the Civil War in Indian Territory, the land runs, just a lot of incredible things that most of us, including myself, the author, when I set out on the project back in 2005, many of these things I did not even realize happened in Oklahoma. And so it goes right, Volume 1 goes right up to the doorstep of World War I, and that's where Volume 2 picks up, and it travels up to the present. And as you and I have discussed, we thought the present was going to be the end of 2019, and then all of a sudden, the calendar turns over to 2020, and doggone it, it looks like we're going to have to add another chapter to Volume 2 that I wasn't planning to have to do.
And so it was a scoop for me last week to find out there's going to be a COVID chapter in the Oklahomans Volume 2. Now, when you do your books about Oklahoma history, I know that when you go back to World War I, World War II, and all that, there are records and there are all kinds of things. Are you approaching the Volume 2 in a different way or in the same way?
Well, it's got to be approached. There are some similarities. Let me talk about that first. The first thing is to realize that we are right in the middle of Oklahoma, American, and world history that is breaking as we're watching. And I tell some of the young people that I know and teach, that have been shaken by this like we all have. I mean, it's like since around the end of February, and I was at that party, by the way, in Oklahoma City where it kind of blew up, where a person came and then the virus kind of spread from there. And Of course, at that point, none of us knew. We knew it was going on far away, but we didn't realize that it was going to, get this close to home and this seriously. So, since that time, maybe 4 months ago, 4.5 months ago, we've all had one blow after another on multiple fronts from multiple directions. And I've told some of the young people I know that it's okay to feel a little beaten and battered here, because this is not normal history. If you're a very young person, you might not know. You might just think, well, this is the way it always is. And you and I know that, no, this isn't. This is big-time history unfolding on multiple fronts. And so for me, some of the similarities to being in the middle of history that, again, none of us were planning to traverse this in the book, Volume 2 of the Oklahomans, but since we found ourselves in the middle of breaking history, some of the similarities to writing past history is, first of all, you've got to realize what's going on best as you can, get your arms around the big picture, understand the multiple currents that are flowing into and intersecting, sometimes conflicting with. We're having to do it, of course, on the fly in real time, so that's really dangerous. But you try to be comprehensive. You try to follow the multiple channels. You also try to get to as many sources of information as you can. And that's not, of course, sources that all agree with one another. So I'm finding myself just constantly, I'm not reading old history now. I'm not going back to old interviews or the archives from the Oklahoma newspaper or Tulsa World or other things. I'm reading what's happening every day. I'm listening to shows like yours and others on KTOK. So there are some similarities that you got to work hard, dig, get other people's opinions. I've got others that are helping edit and check stuff, so it's not one person's opinion. But then there's some very much distinctives of trying to write a chapter of, a year, 2020, that, the year 1968, which is probably the last year I can think of that would even come close to the impact of events in 1 year as 2020. And I think 2020, by the way, already has far surpassed 1968. But 1968, of course, it was the height of the Vietnam War. It was another generation where there was generational strife and societal strife. There were assassinations of great men such as Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And one commentator said that in 1968, America experienced more history than it could digest in 1 year. And I feel like that's the closest thing I can come to describing what I feel like we're in the midst of right now, is there really is more coming at us, and we're really equipped to in an effective way deal with. So I think, on that, as just a side note, I've talked before about how difficult it was for me to write a large section in Volume 2 about the Oklahoma City bombing. And one of the things I wrote at the end of that section that people will read when the book comes out next year is that we need to remember that in that bombing, everybody was damaged. It wasn't just the people at Murrah. It were even the families and friends of people that were lost or injured, the whole state. And I didn't really realize that until I started researching and interviewing people for that Oklahoma City bombing story. And I realized how raw and open that wound really still is for our whole state, just beneath the surface. And so toward the end of that Oklahoma City bombing section, Glenn, it occurred to me, and I wrote this. I said, at the end of the day, we need to realize we were all hurt and we were all damaged, and especially in real time when all those events, those horrible things were unfolding, and all the different theories of who did what and when and how it happened. A lot of people got on each other. There was a lot of conflict among ourselves. And I said, we need to remember that we were all doing our best and we were all wounded. And I think that's a good admonition for us today, is that we're all scared. I think anybody that says they don't have some fear, and that's across the political and philosophic and theological spectrum. We might have different reasons, some of us, for being scared, but we've all got fear. And so I think that we need to take a breath often, give each other more grace maybe than we normally would do, because I don't want us to, to tear ourselves apart. Here in Oklahoma, I think we have an opportunity that maybe they don't in some of the other parts of the country to hold together even amidst our differences. But I think it's incumbent. The only way we're going to do that, Gwen, is we've got to give each other grace. We've got to be patient with one another. Honestly, we've got to be careful on our social media, and we're all on there. And there's times we need to just turn away and not answer and not respond back, or maybe not even go to it for a while. Because we're all struggling. We've all got challenges. We've all got fears. We've all got uncertainties. And so, let's give each other some grace. So those are a few thoughts that come to mind as, I will say this, that by the end of the year, we've got till probably the first of the year to finish the actual writing on the book. So that's going to take in the elections. That's going to take in, several more months of events. So, there will be more yet to come, and then it'll be my job to pull it all together and to write it in a way that realizes that the first time you read the book, it's already going to be somewhat out of date, because as fast as things are happening right now, there will be things happen next year prior to the release of the book that we don't even know about. So I've got to write with the sensitivity to that as well.
I'm going to have to take a break, but because I, too, am a professor, I'm going to give you an assignment during the commercial break. Knowing what you know, and the fact that you make the statement that we're all now makers, not just students of Oklahoma history, what is that pressure like for you to cover the history that's now ongoing in Oklahoma? Also, before the hour is over, I'd like for us to talk about your insights into things like the Trail of Tears and the reservations and things that happened this week regarding Indian country, if you will. So John J. Dwyer is my guest. He is an award-winning, outstanding Oklahoma historian, author, and writer, and is here to talk about Oklahoma history with us tonight. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. You're listening to 1000 KTOK. News Radio 1000 KTOK. Gwin Faulconer-Lippert's here with you on this Sunday evening, talking Oklahoma history with award-winning author John J. Dwyer. We're talking about the fact that he is writing a history of Oklahoma, Volume 1, The Oklahomans, Volume 2, and he was explaining to us how he is approaching this. He joins us this evening to discuss this, and the assignment I gave you, John J. Dwyer, was what kind of pressure is this on you, in quotes, I'll say, to get it right, whatever that means?
Well, we were talking a minute ago, Gwen, about how we've all, everybody in this country and probably most people in the world have been just taking blow after blow since the COVID virus hit us a few months ago, and then all the chain of events that triggered. And in the spirit of that, as if it wasn't enough, trying to figure out how to, if you will, write a new ending to a book that's been in the works for years, Volume 2 of The Oklahomans, that will be coming out next year. All of a sudden, right when, the book is, we're on the 5-yard line and closing out the writing of it, then we just have a whole series of epical historical events occur. And so, in the first place, writing this additional chapter about Oklahoma in 2020 has been quite an adventure, and I don't mean to sound like I'm upset about it. I mean, it's, for a historian, this is kind of an amazing time. All this stuff happening right now when we're coming to the close of a book, but then, as if it wasn't a big enough challenge, then here closer to home, we just get this rapid fire of additional events. Just really in the last week, we have the controversy over protests and counter-protests about the great land run monument in Oklahoma City in Bricktown, probably the biggest United States Supreme Court decision concerning Oklahoma since statehood. comes down on the last day of the Supreme's term this week. And of course, that has, like it seems like everything else in this crazy, wild year of 2020, you can't just capture it in a 30-second soundbite, even though a lot of our media friends and others would like to do that. It resists all attempts to do so because the Supreme Court's decision rendering that the Creeks still have a reservation after all, that takes up a significant part of eastern Oklahoma, including most of Tulsa, which some of the listeners probably know that Tulsa began as a Creek village, a Tulsi town next to the Arkansas River back in the 1800s. But that historic decision by the Supreme Court, it wasn't just, well, here's the verdict, now we know what to do. No, it's, well, what does that mean when the Creeks have a reservation after all? Is that just about certain, legal decisions, criminal verdicts and stuff that would possibly be overturned, or does it have greater implications? And it opens up a whole additional long series of questions that may all be answered in the short term. We kind of all hope that that's true, or it may go on a lot longer than that. So we've got on our own home front here, Gwin, our own whole series of dramas and adventures that are like plates spinning one aside the other in the midst of what's going on nationally. And of course, not to forget that when this virus hit, we already had a really challenging drama going on in our all-important energy industry. And it wasn't that long ago that, if I remember correctly, crude oil prices were minus something.
I think so. I think they're like minus 30 cents or something. Yeah.
Yeah, they were having to pay people to take their oil and store it, and so it wasn't like nothing was happening when the coronavirus, spread across America. So, as far as an assignment that you gave me to, how do you deal with that? Well, I think that one thing that's going to be a challenge is how do I keep this within a page count that doesn't add too much to the book? It's already been some of your listeners know that have talked with me in other settings. It's been a challenge when you consider Volume 1 of the Oklahomans was not a small book, but the period that it covered in Oklahoma, if you went from ancient times going up to statehood, what would the average population of Oklahoma be during that time? Maybe 50,000 or less people, having events, accomplishments, and historical events. Well, say 50,000 people on average. Well, then Volume 2 treks from just before World War I to now, when you've got an average of several million people living in the state. Over 4 million now, certainly 2 to 3 million during most of that period. 2 or 3 million or 4 million people are going to do a lot more than 50,000 people. So I realized it was a real challenge. I noticed that I was having a hard time keeping the chapters down, and I realized finally, well, gosh, it's because there were a lot more people who were doing a lot more things, and it was a lot closer to your and my time and our listeners' lifetimes, and some of it in our lifetimes, a big part of it. So it's already been a challenge to keep the book down, and now to add another chapter, I've got to be able to consolidate the pandemic, the racial drama that has sprung up in the midst of it, the attacks, I would call, on our country, attacks in cities and towns and communities across our country by people that want to change our country in many cases, looting, burning, and those types of things, the ups and downs of the virus, masks, do you wear masks or not? Do you close a restaurant or not? And of course, that's American, that's world, but that's also Oklahoma. And then on top of all that, some of those things coming home to us, we had a presidential rally in Tulsa a while back that was really dramatic. Again, passions were heightened on all sides. There were, many thousands of people and many millions of people on TV that were thrilled to finally see the president be able to get, turned loose for another fire-up rally talk. And then there were many people that were upset about that and didn't like seeing it happen. In Tulsa, as you well know, there was a lot of passions on all sides about should they have even had the rally, and then people that were determined that they would. So,
and then there were people that
right?
were determined to not have a crowd. I need to interrupt 1 minute, but when we come back, I would like for you to address how you balance the different sides, because I know that's one of the goals that you have, that you've even said people have heroes, sometimes different ones. So John J. Dwyer is my guest. We'll talk with him more. You're listening to 1000 KTOK. News Radio 1000 KTOK. Gwin Faulconer-Lippert here with you on this Sunday evening. And we're doing a full hour of Oklahoma history, 87 degrees here in Oklahoma City. Talking to author and historian John J. Dwyer. He has received many medals and awards of recognition for his books: Mustang, Shortgrass, The Oklahomans, The Oklahoman Study Guide, When the Blue Bonnets Come, The War Between the States, The War Between the States Study Guide, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall, Faith in Gods and Generals. He also has taught history and ethics at Southern Nazarene University since 2006. And Dr. Bob Blackburn, the executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, called John's historical narrative, The Oklahomans, The Story of Oklahoma and Its People, Volume 1, the best book on Oklahoma history ever. Volume 2 releases next year, and we're getting insights into his approach to that. And I can go on record. You should pick up a copy of Volume 1, because it is one of the nicest, informative, friendly, human history books I have ever read. And it's, how do you describe it, John? I would say it's in kind of features or chunks or articles, but it also has all those dates and things that you would need to know to pass a test. But it's so much more than that, because it's really about the people and what the people accomplished. One of the things I think you do very well is balance points of view. And that's certainly what we've been talking about tonight, is that this 2020, much like 1968, is about points of view about history. So tell us more about that, if you would.
Well, it's it's a daunting task, at least for me, to set about writing the history of a state in this day and time that is a diverse people. I'll go back to 2005, which is when Dr. Blackburn, you mentioned him a moment ago, the long-time and just renowned executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, who not everyone may be aware is retiring this coming January. I think they kept him around as long as they could before he finally, said, I'm determined to escape from you, because.
And what a treasure, what a true treasure of a person he is, yes.
Oh, yes. In fact, he knows very well. He's heard me say many times that he's the person that should have written these Oklahoma books, but his excuse always was, well, I'm too busy. So just everyone should know that I'm well aware that Dr. Bob Blackburn is the modern-day dean of Oklahoma historians. He's probably forgotten more Oklahoma history than I'll ever know. But that being said, back in 2005, he approached me and asked if I'd be interested in writing a new Oklahoma history book, which at the time it was still a couple of years ahead of the centennial celebration. And I think we both had kind of the idea, far-flung as it might have been, that maybe it could be done in time for that. And of course it wasn't. But I asked him, I said, well, Dr. Blackburn, there's been a lot of books written on Oklahoma history. Why do you think there needs to be another one? And he had a number of reasons. And one of the things he told me that why he was talking to me was he felt like I would go dig out information and come up with my own fresh, material that he didn't always see done, and especially in state histories. And he credited that to my journalism background. I think like you, I got my journalism degree at OU. And, Gwin, I remember in 1974, that's when I started at OU as a student, and I was part of the McMahon journalism class that went in that year. And I remember we hit the campus, we got there about 2 weeks after President Nixon resigned. I mean, that was right in the middle of some epic history of its own, the Watergate scandal and coming out of Vietnam. And so I remember Dr. Bob Carroll, he had our group in there that was McMahon journalism students, and he had us around a big conference table. I remember he basically told us what a journalist was supposed to be. And I don't remember all that he said, but I remember some of it. And the gist of it was, you have a responsibility to honor everybody that has anything to do or might ever have anything to do with any story you write, or their children, or anybody that cares about them. You owe it to all those people. You have a great opportunity and a great responsibility when you get in front of a typewriter, which is what we used back then. And that has always stuck with me. I've taken that seriously. I'm sure I've fallen short at times, but it's always been important to me. And especially now, because I'm sure a lot of your listeners this will resonate with them. But, I just cringe when I sometimes read, sometimes watch, sometimes listen to modern day journalists, and how I don't think they ever had a Dr. Bob Carroll or an OU journalism department back then in old Copeland Hall to grill you on your responsibilities to treat everybody fairly, to look at things from every viewpoint, and to not have your own agenda that you're trying to, carry forward in all that you do. Now, I realize we're all human, and we all, to some degree, have a bias and an agenda, but there's a difference. I think Dr. Carroll would say there's a difference between having an agenda that drives what you do and is one-sided, as opposed to being fair and sometimes writing things that you don't like and where the side that you're for doesn't come out looking too good. And so that's a long-winded way of saying it's very important to me to present all the sides. I got criticized. I'll give you, for instance, on one of the reader reviews on Amazon, somebody sent me a message and said, "God, there's a guy on here that's left a reader review criticizing because he thinks you wrote too much about African Americans in Volume 1, and that you should have remembered that a bunch of white people sold the state too," and just some things along those lines that I actually was very thankful, because one of my goals on Volume 1, Gwin, was that the African Americans of this state for the first time would have in a state history book not just a few requisite names from their community mentioned or a few events, almost as an aside or an adjunct, but be woven through the heart and the fiber of the entire story, which they have always been. And I'm just giving you one example of how I've strived in Volume 1, I'm doing in Volume 2 as well, to make sure that every community, whether we're talking about, a racial group, an ethnicity, a social caste, a perspective, a philosophical group, that everybody, to the extent I can, is represented and represented fairly. And I'll say one other thing on that if we have time. Do we have time another minute before our break?
Yes, you do.
Okay. How that plays out sometimes can be very interesting, because what it means is sometimes I've got stories, and you read some of them in Volume 1, where there are people that I would consider heroes of Oklahoma history that were mortal enemies of one another. And a couple of examples come to mind from the Cherokee Nation. Stan Wadey, who was the only Native American general in the Civil War on either side, was an Oklahoman, and the last Confederate general to surrender in the war. Well, he led one side of the Cherokees, and John Ross led the other. And those of us that know the Cherokee history know that. And those people did not like each other, and for decades they were on opposite sides on huge issues, historic issues in Cherokee and Oklahoma and American history. And it's very difficult to approach that without being, getting caught up and being very bias toward one side or another, but I consider those two men both great heroes for the Cherokees and for Oklahoma. And just one other quick example, Kate Barnard, who the lovely statue there sitting on the bench at the state capitol just inside the east entrance, will she, and people have read on our Oklahoma History Facebook group page, which I would encourage your listeners to check into if that's just the name of it, Oklahoma History. People that have been on there know that my favorite hero from Oklahoma history is Kate Barnard. She was, they called her Oklahoma's good angel and our Kate. And she was the one that got more votes in the first vote after statehood than the governor of Oklahoma. She got more votes to be chairman of commissions and corrections than the governor did in his race that won, and that was before women could even vote. Well, she was hugely opposed by many of the great founding fathers of Oklahoma. Our first governor, Charles Haskell, Alfalfa Bill Murray, who was the first Speaker of the House and later governor, Charles Colcord, all those names in downtown Oklahoma City that Colcord Drive and building, who was a great, pioneer. They all opposed Kate Barnard, and yet all of those people, in my opinion, we can learn from our heroes of Oklahoma.
News Radio 1000, KTOK, Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. We've been talking Oklahoma history during this entire hour with author and historian John J. Dwyer. He is an award-winning professor, author, historian, and one of the best storytellers, I think. I'd love to talk to you, John, because you tell the best stories, and you really highlight people that I don't remember from my 9th grade Oklahoma history book, so I'm wondering if they were even there. Because, as you know, the Black Wall Street disaster was not in my history book way back then, but that's another story. Let me ask you one final thing. We were talking about that you honor diversity, and gosh, here you are on the right side of history, and you did it because it was the right thing to do, not because it was popular right now, but because it was the right thing to do. I would also like to know, though, your ideas and thoughts about the importance of respecting all Oklahoma historical monuments, because you were making the point earlier that heroes are heroes to the people that follow them. And so is it right for us to not respect someone else's hero?
No, Gwen, it's not. And so on that count, I'm just going to come out and say that these events in recent days, in some cases vandalizing, other cases wanting to get rid of the magnificent 47 statue epic monument to our state's history, the land run of 89 down in Bricktown by Paul Moore, who we are fortunate in Oklahoma to have Norman resident, I believe, Paul Moore, to have a man of that caliber and character that has been able to sculpt our history. And here's the thing, that's a land run monument that upsets some people, but there could be a monument down the road that honors one of our great native chiefs. The people, and I'm not going to name a particular name, it could be one of a number, who people might revere for his leadership, his warrior spirit and courage. And yet I learned a lesson years ago, Gwen, as so often I do, from my students. In one of my Southern Nazarene Oklahoma history courses, I was talking, as I often do, about the Comanches and just how the admiration I have for them. I grew up in Duncan, went to school, had the natives around us were Comanches, and I had them on my basketball and football teams. And so in my teaching and my writing, I love to talk about the lords of the plains and their great horsemanship and just their defiant and tough spirit and many other things. Well, I noticed there was this one young lady in the class, and she was a native, but she was a different tribe, not Comanche. And every time I mentioned the Comanches, she would get this grim look on her face. And finally, I said something about, the Lords of the Plains. There's never been greater horsemen in the history of the world. And I, looked right at her when I said it, and she looked like she was about ready to, spit nuggets at me. And I said, okay, what does that look for? Every time I mention the Comanche, you get this really, angry look on your face. And it took a little bit of encouragement, but she finally leaned across her desk and she said, if the Comanches had done to your people what they did to mine, you would hate them too. And this was well into the 21st century, Gwen, and whatever events she was talking about, of course, happened in distant centuries, long before any of us were around. But that taught me a lasting lesson that many, many, many times one person's patriot and hero is another person's villain that they have been raised to despise. And I could give you a lot of other examples of that from my years of teaching, when people realize that they might have blood. I had an African-American young woman one time that she found out that the tribes, the 5 Indian republics, owned slaves, and she was so upset. She said, we've always been taught to respect and feel sorry for the Indians because, the Trail of Tears and all. And she goes, now I find out they own my forefathers as slaves, and she was real upset until she found out that she had 2 Creek great-grandparents in her own bloodline. And I said, and when she came to class that night, I said, well, how does that make you feel? And gradually she began to develop a real respect, admiration, and a feeling of belonging to the Creeks and an interest in studying their history. And she goes, well, it makes me begin to see things from other people's viewpoint. And I have to say, I'm a student of that myself. I'm still learning at my advanced age to see things from other people's viewpoint. I haven't mastered it yet. But I think if we can all do that and we can look and see that Land Run Monument was a bunch of tough, poor people that came to Oklahoma, as Mark Green and others have said, they've quoted from our book, the land of the second, third, and sometimes last chance. They had nowhere else to go, nowhere they could get free land, but they had to be tough to get it, ride for it, and hold it. Those people were heroes. They were many of our forefathers. And also those people that walked the trails of tears, those people that fought in battles, the Comanches versus the pioneers and the U.S. Cavalry. We have heroes on both sides. So maybe it's just taken us a while, Gwen, to live enough history to begin to realize that, wow, it's not just one side or another, that we have heroes in a lot of different directions. And that's what I'll summarize it with. Oklahoma history is full of pain and sorrow and tragedy and heroes.
That's well said. Pain and sorrow and tragedy and heroes. Okay, how do we get your book before we run out of time?
Sure. Well, of course, probably the easiest way is just to go to our website, John J. Dwyer, John, middle initial J, Dwyer, D-W-Y-E-R, johnjdwyer.com. Lots of stuff on there, features. If you want to be a free recipient of our Oklahoma history blog that I shoot out every month to several thousand people on that now, you can tell me that. You can communicate with me directly through johnjdwyer.com. You can see information on all of our books, and you can have information as we move closer to the release of Volume 2 of the Oklahomans next year, including this new and still developing, still breaking chapter on 2020 Oklahoma.
That's just amazing. And, you have such a gift, such a gift. And I thank you so much for sharing it with me tonight. And again, johnjdwyer.com, and you can see a number of his different books. Thank you so much for your time on a Sunday night, and let's talk soon.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Gwen.
Thank you. I appreciate you.